Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleischer Show, broadcasting live from Israel to the world. You're a part of it wherever you are. Today's show is a bit of a special one. We have an amazing Torah portion with Rav Mike Feuer, which I recorded on the Mediterranean. You know, the Yam HaTichon, the great coast that we have here in Israel. Not the Red Sea one, the other one, the Mediterranean. So it's a great discussion that we had, very special, about the Ten Commandments, the Big Ten. And the Torah portion of Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, which is a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That is the Torah portion of Yitro. And then my debate discussion with Knesset member Michal Cotler-Wunch about the future of Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, in international law. I should say maybe the so-called international law. In any case, we had a great debate and discussion moderated by Avi Abelo. So it's a big show and a good show, maybe not quite as long as last week, but still packs a punch. And I love it, the fact that you guys are with us. So write me an email, yishai@thelandofisrael.com or yishai@yishaifleischer.com. And let's get right started with Rav Mike Feuer on this amazing Torah portion, which we should be wowed about. And I think I talk about that right at the beginning, of being wowed by the Ten Commandments and by this Torah portion that God gave us, the greatest gift other than life itself and the land of Israel and the Jewish people and his revelation. The greatest single gift is the Torah itself, which makes all those other things really possible. So here's Rav Mike Feuer and myself on the Mediterranean. Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleischer Show, broadcasting live from the Mediterranean and partially from Judea to the world. You're a part of it wherever you are. Shalom and welcome to a special broadcast. As you could probably guess, behind me is the Mediterranean, and I had to kind of run the blockade a little bit and switch to an undisclosed location here on the beach of Israel. And Rav Mike Feuer joins us from his usual abode. Rav Mike, shalom and welcome.
Shalom. I actually ran a blockade of few small children and a lot of spilled milk in order to get in here as well. So let's not undervalue what I had to go through to be present today.
Oh my gosh. All right. So just one little political thing that I wanted to talk to you before we get to the massive and important Torah portion.
Heavens for
I just want to say, right. I don't want to miss it. Well, it's important because, you know, we believe that connecting the Torah to the reality of Israel today is actually the proper religious thing to do, since this is God's miracle happening, and the Bible is the best way for us to know. The Torah is the best way for us to know where to move forward in this reality of a reborn Israel. Right?
Yep, sure. I'm with you. So what do you got?
But here's the thing that's bothering me, right? So I was watching the Israeli news the other day, and I'm watching some of the top folks. Well, you know, but I like to know what's going on. So I was watching some of the top folks, some of the top leaders that are running for political office coming up, and probably will be ministers or even prime ministers. And I'm listening to them talk for an hour. I'm not exaggerating. An hour, I listen to different folks on the news. And here's all I'm hearing. I won't sit with him. I will sit with him. I'll consider sitting with him, but I would never sit with him because sitting with him means. So I'm listening to this. Then the other part of it is we've got to switch the government. The government's got to be switched. It's failed. What exactly have they failed in? Well, that's non-specific. But we got to switch them out. It's more like the reason I want to switch them out because I think it's my turn. That's what it sounds like.
Yes.
And so you're listening to this, and then at first I was like, just getting annoyed, and I'm like, why am I annoyed? But then I was like, wait a minute, I'm realizing why I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed because we live in such an amazing, great time. We live in such a radical, revolutionary, and revelatory, as in revelations, revolution and revelation. And we're living in this miraculous period, and the discourse is so superficial, so small, so lacking in vision. I'm thinking to myself, there's a dissonance, a discord between where we really are and what I'm seeing on TV and how it's all being portrayed and explained by people who are purportedly leaders, but are really nothing more than politicians at this stage of the game.
And that's where I think you put your finger on the problem. Note, by the way, that this is not solely our problem. It has a very profound parallel to what's happening in the American political discourse. You know, and what I would say is that the difference between politicians and leaders is that the politicians of today are interested in telling people what they want to hear in order to maintain their power. Their primary job is to get reelected, which is not unfair, since in order to do any good, they have to be in office. But I think that the real root of the problem you're speaking about is the very bourgeois nature of our society. Right? Meaning, what does the average person want? Remember, this is a democracy. And when they say those things on television, they are speaking to the people like yourself and others who are watching, who are potentially going to vote for them. And these people are not stupid. Whatever one may think of them, none of them are stupid. None of them would have made it that far in life if they were stupid. Right? And they're also surrounded by very intelligent people. And their sense is that what everyone wants is an easy life. They want to go back to normal when we talk about the pandemic. When we speak about our country, just want to make the economy flow. I want the money coming in, and I want the goods going out, etc. And I think that the challenge is that leadership in our day runs a very big risk, because the reality is the type of change that some of us want, and I say want, although I question how deeply we want it. The type of change that we have on the horizon involves some very deep destruction and reconstruction of the life in which we live. Mm-hmm. I mean, is it really possible to create the vision of an equal society, a just society, a divinely inspired society, and keep the economic disparities in our country that allow you to be standing on that balcony right now looking over the Mediterranean? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the disruptive nature of the change which is to come, I think, is what a lot of people are afraid of. And what these politicians are doing is they're basically selling calm. It's like the Soma of the political world. You remember Soma?
Sure, of course. So, I hear you, and I don't disagree with anything you said. But I think that there's also, I envisioned myself in that newsroom and what do you call the studios there at Channel 13 or 12 that I was watching. I don't remember. And I just imagined myself there being like, when they asked me a question like, will you sit with this guy? Will you sit with this guy? I imagine myself saying like, hey, before I answer this question, which I'm willing to answer, that's all the mechanics of politics. Can we just for a second thank God for this great time that we're living in? Can we just for a second take a deep breath and be so thankful that we're in a Jewish country that's relatively safe, with a strong economy, with a growing sense of Judaism and a connection to the land, that our youth are, as statistics are showing, are nationalistic, into tradition. Like let's take it all in and be so thankful for just a second to the God of Israel, who has fulfilled his promises, and that we have the great schut, merit, let's call it luck, to be living in this time. Just the fortune, like wow, like just to be wowed by everything and not to allow the discourse to be degraded. Your point that they're selling calm is true on one side. On the other hand, I could argue the exact opposite. They're selling mini fights.
Yes. That
are meaningless, little. I think when I came to America, the thing that shocked me when I was a kid, what shocked me most was WWF. I was like, what is this thing?
And that was before everyone accepted that it was fake.
But it was obviously fake. I could tell it was fake, and I was just like,
tell it to my peers when I was growing up. People get angry about that stuff.
You know what I mean? I was an Israeli kid with long hair, and my parents were Russian. I didn't have to.
You were an outsider to begin with.
Anything. Yeah, I was just like looking at this, and I'm just like, this is wacky stuff. This country creates these fake wars and fake social tensions. I mean, I think that WWF is actually is on steroids in the world that we're living in. That's what I mean. It's just like, why are you making mini fights that are senseless and purposeless? For what end? It's just to make television tonight, just to get yourself, I don't know, more popular.
It's just to distract and to maintain power. And so I would say actually those two things actually go together. Is that selling a sense of it's going to be okay, we just need to tinker a little bit. There aren't any fundamental problems really. If you just put me in charge, everything's actually all right. The problem is Bibi. The problem is Gantz. The problem is, meaning it's in a way in which a person can recognize that obviously the system's not working. Something's wrong. I'm not stupid as the average voter. But the problem isn't fundamental. The problem is instrumental. It's in these people, and so therefore this guy is going to get it right. As opposed to engaging, like being wowed by the situation, is also, if you're honest with it, is engaging the fact that the last 100 years have been a incredibly traumatic and disruptive period for our people. And we're not done with that. We're not done. I mean, stopping short at a physical vision of abundance is a failure. But the next phase is deeply frightening because we don't know where to go. And for whatever reason, the Banash Olam is waiting for us to do it without the type of leadership that we merited that gave us the physical security that we now enjoy. We don't have spiritual leadership right now to give us that vision.
I guess, Rav Mike, I guess you and I are talking on two different levels, and I hope people hear it. I'm talking on the level of, you're talking on a level of the next, as Rabbi Yehuda Cohen would say, the next challenge of Jewish liberation. And I'm talking more like realize the thing that is, meaning to say, without even going to the next challenge, just take a deep breath and be happy, be thankful for this great time. And okay, let's leave it at that. I think those are two great ways to perceive it. Let me just press on some of these. Let me just show some of the folks that are mentioning things. We have Yaakov Walk, who says, I feel like saying the blessing on the Mediterranean. That's right. When you see the Mediterranean that you haven't seen in 30 days, you're supposed to make a blessing on it. And I have to rethink if I should have said the blessing or should I say it today. So thank you, Yaakov, for that. And indeed, by the way, we have blessings for just saying beautiful things or seeing a person of great power, a great king. We have blessings for these things. And again, that goes right back to our conversation, Rav Mike. Yaakov is just looking here and he's just like, I got to say a blessing for this. Sometimes you can reduce these things to simple things. There's a halacha. Be turned on by this. Be turned on by this great place. Erica says, Shalom Chaverim from snowy Sweden. And Erica, you're not alone who's snowed in. The folks in many of my family members, colleagues, and friends that still live in New Jersey, New York, they're snowed in, but they look like they're having fun out there. But it's a totally different. It's like 3 feet of snow, and kids are having the time of their life. So that's good for them. But we're here in the Mediterranean. Mark Pickles wrote Boker Tov from Manchester, England, and I hope, Rav Mike, you saw Mark's article.
I did. I very much appreciated it.
Yeah, Mark's article in the Times of Israel about bringing the holiness to the language, to the English language back. That was very interesting, and he writes very interesting and scientifically minded articles. Bible and science come together in only a way that the British folks can do it. It's like something very, there's a hybridization there of true Bible and true Western culture that comes together. Great stuff. And we have Marilyn, who says Shalom from North Carolina. And Lou says, what does Lou say? He says, Yaakov Walk would love that too. We are planning to go to the Hermon next week if they lift the lockdown. So a lot of people are looking to break out. Yeah. So back to our topic. For me, what would have been so great is to see Gideon Sar or Ayelet Shaked, who I saw on TV, just be like, hey, news anchor, do you know what Parshat is? It's Parshat Yitro this week. And Parshat Yitro, that's like the 10 commandments, the 10 big ones, the Big 10, right? As we call the show. And can we talk about just for a second? Can I tell you my favorite, issue on the 10 commandments or something? Like, just for a second, be wowed. And the person who brought the wow factor to our Torah portion this week is actually a non-Jew. His name is Yitro or Jethro. If you watch The Prince of Egypt, he's jolly, maybe overweight a little bit. The Torah never tells us that, but I like that image because it's this image of a wise Gentile. I myself have a few Gentiles in my life. Some of them happen to be even religious figures who I find to be non-Jewish religious figures who I find to be useful. They have a way, they have a knowledge, they have a wisdom. And our sages tell us that non-Jews have wisdom, not Torah wisdom specifically, but definitely wisdoms that you could learn from. And this Jethro, he's the father-in-law of Moses. He comes to the camp. He brings back Moses' wife and his 2 sons. And he is, the first thing that we learn about him is that he's wowed. He's wowed. And there's a few verses, like one after the next, which kind of say he was wowed. And he unified. He was able to understand things in unity. Here's the word, okay? Vayichad Yitro al kol hatova asher asa Hashem leIsrael asher itzilo miyad Mitzrayim. So One explanation means that yichad means he got goosebumps. He was like, ooh, wow, that is crazy, right? But another explanation is no, he was able to unify all the good that God had done for Israel that took them out of Egypt. My explanation is he was able to unify it in terms of the global universal context. He's like, I'm a Gentile, there's a universe, but I see that by God choosing to pull the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt, what it really means is liberation and freedom and truth is going to be revealed for the whole world. And here I am to see that.
I mean, this is Yitro's role in general, I would say. And he represents in that the role that Midian, his nation, plays in relationship to Israel in many places, which is that there always needs to be the universal as coupled to the particular. Right? Sinai, as you just said, is ultimately the mission of giving the Torah as a redemption of the whole world. But it's given specifically to one people who's been taken out of slavery, sort of schlepped through the desert, as it were, and standing there at Sinai. And, the power of revelation is in its reality. It's not an abstract. It's not philosophical notions, etc. It's a visceral experience which leaves its imprint on a people who will then pursue it in a real way in the world to this very day, like you were pointing out. At the same time, the limitation of revelation is that it's parochial. What do I mean? Well, if it was a real event, it means that they're real people with a real language and real cultural context who had something for breakfast, and they're going to go to sleep tonight after a fight with their spouse, and etc. Meaning it seems to make it very small. And so Yitro represents that touch of the universal. When he's present, he has that perspective from the outside, which shows you that this is not some sort of self-contained, today in the terms we call it culturally relative. Like, oh, that was revelation for you. But, the truth is, if somebody else were there, they would have seen it differently. But the truth is, somebody else was there. And his greatness is that he was able to appreciate both the fact that it was for Israel, but it was for the world as well.
Right. And it even says it in this Torah portion that he basically goes home to his people to do his thing. And our sages explained that he went to bring them closer to the God that he saw that was revealed, to bring them to Judaism or a vision of the Torah, but it's very clear that he remains, and there's something I think very beautiful about that. He's like, no, I remain separate. I have a very good friend who's a kind of famous Noahide, which means that he is a Gentile who practices the 7 commandments of Noah instead of Christianity, and he basically always told me, he's like, my greatest privilege is not to be a Jew. It's to stay outside and to bring the revelation of God's Torah to the Gentiles in the way that they can accept it. I just want to stop for a second, Rav Mike, and say that Jay White says, Shalom, guys. Beautiful view, Yishai, and great to see you again, both of you. Also, both you and Malka said a blessing for my very sick mother in London with COVID, and she is, Baruch Hashem, recovering Todah. So thank God.
She should be healthy well.
Amen. The other thing about Jethro, Yitro, is that he also sees that the attack on the Jews is a proof positive that they're a holy people and that God is with them. Yeah, well. He understands that actually, if you see somebody who's very successful, you're like, he's blessed. But Yitro takes it to a different place where he sees the attack of Amalek. He sees the splitting of the Red Sea and the Egyptian effort to destroy Israel. He sees that as proof of God. Why don't we talk about that for a second?
I mean, it's a truism that if you're not making waves in the world, then you're probably not accomplishing much, right? And there's a sense in which it goes back to what I was saying before, was that the truly revolutionary potential of the Torah involves a breaking of what is in order to allow what might be to emerge. And that's one of the real challenges. I mean, I can tell you, for me personally, not having been raised in a religious family, my decision to become sort of shomer Torah mitzvot, like observant of the Torah and its commandments, involved the breaking of my old life. Now, not a complete erasure, but there had to be a cracking of a shell in order for something to emerge. And this is, I think, what Yitro recognizes, is that you might think, conflict. Torah, kol nitivotah shalom, right? All the paths of the Torah are paths of peace. It must be that this conflict indicates that they're wrong. And we hear this from our Jewish brothers and sisters and the non-Jews as well in the world today. How could it be that returning to your land would be right if it's wrapped up with so much conflict? Which it is. I mean, one doesn't have to take sides even. I mean, just recognize like it's been a mess. And I'm definitely a believer that one man's liberation can be another man's Nakba. I get it. Why that was, who's responsible, how it happened, that's an important discussion. But there's no need to dismiss the trauma and destruction which surrounds our rebirth. What needs to be done is to appreciate the fact that it's indication that something larger than the world was prepared to hold is coming into being. And that's what Yitro recognizes. The very fact that Amalek of all peoples is the first to attack is the indication to him that this is not a small event, but it's one of a world-shaping potential.
And I think people like Yitro also have the keen sense that darkness wants to stop holiness from bursting forth. The dark energies just are out there to do that. And so, things like the 6-Day War could be understood themselves as a vehicle for revelation through the very effort to choke out that light. And then it kind of bursts forth. There's a grandeur, there's a beauty in it. And anybody who lived through the 6-Day War will tell you that one of the great parts of that miracle was that Israel was so sure that it was going to be decimated. And yet when they burst the other way around, it was, how should we say? It was, it was magic, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mikatel katze, as we say. It's a complete overturning from one end to the other.
All right, let's keep going. But however, Yitro is not just this kind of Gentile who's like, wow, guys, you guys are so awesome. Can I just be part of the story? Like,
he's not a passive observer.
Right. That's like one part of the Jethro thing, which is like he sees the big picture and kind of shares with us the big picture. And in fact, I forgot to say that is one of the few verses in the Bible where God is blessed by mankind, and Yitro blesses God for what he has done. But that's not... Is that right?
Yeah, he's the first to use that phrase, sure.
Okay, so he says, Baruch Hashem. He says, and this is what we say here in the Jewish people. When you ask a Jewish person, how are you doing? The standard answer is Baruch Hashem, thank God. And that really comes from Yitro. But that's not enough for Yitro. He's not going to be satisfied with just looking at it and being some kind of passive appreciator of it or a connoisseur of revelation. You like that, connoisseur of revelation? I like that.
Connoisseur of revelation.
That's right. But he's more than that. He is an active player in it, because when he actually sees his son-in-law doing what he's doing, which is Moses standing sitting from morning to night and judging the Jewish people, he sees that this is a mistaken system. Now, there's two different reads. There's a few different reads, but one of the reads is that he didn't like that the Jewish people were standing and Moses was sitting. And he says to them, you're not giving enough respect to the Jewish people. This is an interesting line of reasoning that you actually find throughout the Chumash, that there's something a bit elitist, a bit, God forbid, but don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but there's a line of thought that Moses is a tad elite over or critical of the Jewish people. That's one line. I prefer the more what I understand is kind of a simpler meaning, which is that he says this is not a good system of governance. There's no way that you could be both a prayer and spiritual leader, a Torah teacher, and also the judge that deals with all matters. You need to find for yourself people that are going to be lower judges. You need to create a system, a bureaucracy, if you will, for. Why is that funny?
I'm just laughing that whoever in our day and age would say, you need to create a bureaucracy. Like the bureaucracy is like, we need to get rid of this bureaucracy. But I understand what you're saying is that there's a way in which Moshe's care for Am Yisrael led him down a false path of trying to do everything himself, because he knew that, of course, no one was going to be able to do it as well as he. Right. And Yitro's wisdom was that there's an organic process that you need to get off the ground here of having the people speak to one another and then bringing their questions to you. Although I would point out that this theme of Moshe having a difficulty of really appreciating the average human experience. It parallels also Eliyahu, who also had a hard time. In a lot of that, I think, is just the price you pay for the level of divine intimacy which they experienced. There's just a certain point where you can't have it all. And having gone as high as he did on the mountain, so to speak, as we'll get to, to a certain degree, you lose touch with the ground. And that's just the way it is.
For example, in a section that I kind of skipped, they have a big meal. The elders have a big meal with Yitro. So the commentators ask, where is Moses? So one commentator's answer is, what do you mean, where's Moses? It's his tent. He's serving everybody. He's actually the one who's pouring the wine. He's the most humble of people. He's just literally the servant at this party. And that's why his name isn't mentioned. But others' opinions say, no, he didn't go to the party. He went to his tent and did what he does, which is contemplate godliness and learn Torah. He didn't have time for even his father-in-law's and the elders' party. He's above that. And so those are very different perspective. Or where's Moses, right? Like, where's Waldo? Where's Moses? Is he serving the wine, or is he totally aloof and at a completely different spiritual place? And that tension exists.
Yes, no question.
Okay. In any case, Yitro tells Moses, you got to have a different system, and here's what you got to do. You got to basically create a hierarchy of judges. And he says this line. Let's read together chapter 18, Yudchet, Shmot Yudchet, Torah portion of Yitro, chapter 18, verse 21, Chaf Aleph. Vata, and you, Moses, Vata, techazeh mikol ha'am. I want you to find or see or look for. But this is also kind of pun, because you are a chozeh, you are a visionary when it comes to God's reality. Now I need you to look down to the people. Techazeh mikol ha'am, look for it within the people. Anshe chayil, men of valor, yirei Elohim, people who fear God. Anshe emet, people of truth. Sonei batza, people who hate financial irregularities. What's it called?
Bribery.
Bribery. V'samta alehem, and make them sarei alafim, make them into judges of thousands, sarei meot, ministers of hundreds, ministers of 50s, and ministers of 10s. Okay, so create a system and let them deal with the lower matters. You're at the upper court, and you're also a teacher, a spiritual teacher. That's what you got to do. But if you don't do that, then you are going to wither away. You're going to wither away. He says to him, Navoti bol, you're going to totally wither away. Gamata gamamaze, you and this people, asher imachu, which are with you. Ki kaved mimcha davar, because it's heavy from you, this thing. By the way, this issue of heaviness is an interesting topic in Moses' life. Sometimes his hands are heavy. Sometimes his speech is heavy, right? He says kavad pau kavad lashonani. There's like sometimes things are heavy. You know what? If you're Moses, things are really heavy. This nation is heavy, and really being eyeball to eyeball is the heaviest with God is the heaviest thing of them all.
Which is one of the reasons that Moshe has, I think, a hard time relating to the capacity of the average person to hold it all, right? And that causes problems for him all the way down the line in the gradual anger that he accumulates toward Am Yisrael as the journey through the wilderness progresses, right? But I just think it's worth it to touch on some of the specifics here, because this isn't a recipe, going back to how you opened the show in terms of leadership as opposed to politicians. This is a recipe for leadership, right? Anshe Chayil is an important one, right? Anshe Chayil are people of valor, meaning there's an element of courage in activism, even at the risk. There's a reason that Chayil is also a Chayal in the noun form in modern Hebrew. That's a soldier, because in the end of the day, a soldier is someone who embodies the posture of service to the point of self-sacrifice, right? That the service model of leadership, unfortunately, in politics has been lost. Like who's really serving who? One of the great challenges I see, at least here in Israel, in this COVID crisis is that early on, our leaders, even the ones whom I respect, showed that they don't really see themselves as, bound to same rules. We're all locked down at Pesach, but they're having, meals with their family, or etc. So it's a deep challenge. The leader needs to be in service of the people and not vice versa. And Anshe Emet is the other one I would pick on. That's very hard, because I think that Emet and ideology are not the same thing. Right? There's a unfortunate holdover, what I would call a holdover from the early Zionist days, when the great age of ideology in the modern world, right? It was like ideological splitting. I mean, you look at the religious right, the Zionist religious parties who are right now continuing this sort of like what seems to be an inevitable fragmentation there, where you're going to have a party for every individual, right? Right. But it's important to remember that the Torah's conception of Emet isn't just about a purity and an absolutism. It's also about a vision of how everything fits together in the end. And so therefore it has to have a certain softness to it as well. The ability to put the pieces together in an honest fashion is very important in a leader.
That's a very good point. And I think that there's a synagogue in Chicago that I used to speak at called Anshe Emet. Yeah. And I always like that name. Anshe Emes, of course. But I really like that name, but it's a high demand. Anshe Chayil, men of valor, sure, I understand that. But Anshe Emet is not so simple. And I've kind of been asking people, I think I might have mentioned with you before last week, Rav Mike Feuer. I think I mentioned that I'm asking people, I'm recommending to people to really concern themselves with speaking only truthful things in this time, when truth is such a rarity. It's just let's just really try to be an Anshe Emet inside. Let's try to be Anshe Emet, even if we don't know something, even if we're not sure. Yes, distinguish between ideology and truth, and let's stick to things that we know are true. And I have a lot of friends at different parts of the spectrum, and they all say to me right now these days, they're like, the most important thing right now is Torah, because we know that Torah is truth. We know we can hold on to the truth of Torah. I think gratitude is a type of truth that you can always hold on to. As they say, assume the attitude of gratitude, right? It's like, I think that is a very simple piece of advice right now, because complaint is, in a sense, not really truthful. Like, is it fair for you to complain? Is it appropriate, or is it correct to complain in comparison with other people? If you're blessed right now, be truthful by speaking blessings right now, and speaking words of Torah, and also words of kindness, because kindness is always a truth. There's a truth in kindness.
I want to sound a note of caution.
Okay, go ahead.
It's not that complaint is not true. Trust me.
Right.
Like, I don't have to go far to go to see things which I think are worthy of complaint. Everybody has hard things happening for them right now. The challenge is that when we fail to appreciate the fact that that's not the whole picture. And that's what I meant, that the Torah's attitude on Emet is holistic. It's emergent. You have to have a light grasp on it, because if you try to grip it, this is the reality. You understand how hard things are right now. I'm not working, and my kids, and the health, and this. I'm not denying that. Those things are true. But the truth is bigger than that. And so therefore, that's why gratitude, I agree with you, is such an important tool, because what it does is it causes you to look up from the details, like you were saying before, and see like, oh, it's a widening of horizon.
Yeah.
It's an opening of the heart. And it's a focus on a broader perspective, which puts everything in its right place. It's not that the complaints aren't true. It's just that they don't define the situation.
I think you explained it really, really well, better than I explained it, and that's exactly what I meant, which is like, don't let this thing squish you inside and make you into this little complaint machine. I have some friends and I talk to them. I have some, I really pride myself on surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me, and I just like recently, no, present company included, and I just say to them, sometimes I can feel my friends are in this dark place, and I say to them, bro, man, just snap out of it a little bit, and in part that's why I had to break the blockade and come down here, and by the
way, I just want you to know you are broadcasting your violation of the Israeli law, and you will
I am. I just want to make it clear. I'm actually within my rights in Israel, but I don't want to get into why that is. But in any case, I'm okay. I am a law-abiding lover of patriotic lover of my state.
You ever cross against?
What's that?
I say you ever cross against a red light. Nothing. I'm just giving you a hard time.
All right, let's keep going. Okay, let's go to one of the most important phrases maybe in the Torah, and that's a big statement. That's a big statement to make, but I think you're going to agree with me. It's
now I'm going to disagree just because.
It's chapter 19, verse 5. No, let's go back a little bit beforehand. Let's go to chapter 19, verse 3. Moshe went up to the God. Vayikra elav, and he called unto him, Hashem, using the tetragrammaton, God. Vayikra elav Hashem minahar le'emo. God called to him from the mountain, saying, Ko tomar levet Yaakov v'tagid levnei Israel. Thusly, such you should tell the house of Jacob, which usually is understood to be the women, v'tagid levnei Yaakov, and tell or command the children of Israel, the men, meaning to say, speak it to the women, tell it to the men. That atem ra'item asher asiti lemitzrayim. You saw what I did to Egypt. V'sa etchem al kanfei nesharim, and I carried you upon wings of eagles. I made you soar. Ve'avi etchem elai, and I brought you to me. And here's the big verse. No, yeah, this one. V'ata im shamo tishmeu bekoli. Now, if you listen, if you hearken to my voice, ushmartem et briti, and keep my covenant, ve'hitem li segula mikol ha'amim ki li kol haaretz. You will be for me a powerful, unique, empowered,
precious portion.
Precious, but the word segula comes from the word mesugal. You have abilities. You'll have abilities, or precious.
Well, I mean, the funny thing I would say actually, ifcha mistabra, the way in which we use to be misugal or histagel in modern Hebrew has its root in its meaning here. Meaning, what is treasure? It's nothing. You can't eat gold. Go ahead and try to light a fire with a diamond. You can't actually do anything with it. But what it is raw potential. Right? It opens up the capacity to do anything in the world. And that's how I understand the relationship. That's what I think God means here. Anyway, meaning, listen, every nation has its power. Every nation has its important role in God's world. There is no nation without it. Even Amalek, as we know, plays an important role, though perhaps not a particularly desirable one. But Am Yisrael has a capacity which is rooted in that preciousness to be anything. And that's why God gave us the Torah, because to give the Torah to a people who was already defined by a particular role would be to limit its potential to change the world. To give it to a people who are going to take it, by the way, not always in the best of places, but who are capable of everything, means that the full infinity which is embedded in the Torah will be able to come out.
I just want to make a little point. You said that being Amalek is not enviable. And yet a lot of people really like that role, especially today with social media. The role of sticking it, the role of popping the balloon, the role of needling, the role of like bringing down, of cynicism.
The fact that
snarkiness,
might like
snarkiness.
It's a spiritual snark.
Huge.
They are the spiritual snark.
That's right. They're the snarkers, okay? They're there to snark you. Think about that. It's like a whole culture out there. I think a lot of people are into today being Amalek. I think in many ways, think about this, Rav Mike, Amalek is a much cooler modality than Jewish. There's something kind of like ninny-ish, good guy-ish, a little, Pollyannish to be like a Jew that's trying to bring light and God's, the Ten Commandments. Is that cool today? Or snarkiness, which is the cooler, younger, cooler, hipper thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, listen, as someone with struggling to raise teenage kids, this idea of cool is a very difficult thing.
Yeah,
it's a very difficult thing, and I don't know if we want to dive into it right now, but doing what's right because it's right, because you have a vision of what the world is capable of, is an adult posture. And people who are obsessed with the cool are essentially children. Right? And while that's understandable in children, in adults, it's deadly.
Well, I'll challenge you on that. It isn't the Greco-Roman modality of beauty, attractiveness. There's something that draws all of us into that, and even let's call that cool. I'm guessing that the Greco-Romans were cooler than the Maccabees in some ways, you know?
Yeah, but
right?
Okay, I'll keep pushing, because that's a corruption really of classical Greek culture. Because remember that there was a great love between classical Greek culture and the rabbis, because ultimately to true Greco-Roman culture, I don't know about the Roman part, true Greek culture, the beautiful and the aesthetic were indications of the true and the holy. I mean, they were a gateway to philosophical understandings, to rightness in behavior, right? And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that it's better we all be nebbish and unattractive and awkward, etc. No, I think there's a very important place for aesthetics, for clarity of communication, for even pizzazz, a little bit of pizzazz to meet your snark. Right? I think those are very important things, but they won't always has to differentiate between style and substance. That when
Very
style
good.
is in service of substance, it's great. When it's in replacements for it, it's deadly.
Great point. I think another way of saying what you just said, which was very well articulated, is if you're God's people, be beautiful, be cool. You can bring to the world that godly truth with just a little bit of being awesome.
And in service of God and not of oneself.
Exactly. By the way, I just want to tell you that I'm right now north of Gaza, just about 10 kilometers. I could see Gaza, parts of Gaza City. I think Khan Yunis actually from here, from this balcony. And I'm thinking about the people that are right now under that open air prison, not that Israel's created, but that Hamas has created, and really have turned that blessed land into many ways an accursed land. And right now on my Facebook page, as we're talking, this guy named Mohidul Islam, is what he calls himself anyway, keeps writing "Free Palestine." I'm thinking to myself, I would love to free Palestine. First thing I'm going to start being like, I'm Palestine. Yes, like free Palestine, 100%. Free us from the tyranny of exactly the same people that afflict the Islamic world, which is this Muslim Brotherhood and these regressive forces that really want endless war. It's really time to free this whole region from their way of thinking, and it's certainly, and Israel too should start to behave like this is our land, and then free those people from that subjugation. Give them a chance if they so want to be part of Israel, the Jewish state, or help them repatriate in their region, or more than anything, we could free Palestine by speaking in clarity. In my opinion, this is our land, that we have a vision for decency for people around us. The real vision is a strong Israel surrounded by strong Arab countries working in cooperation for a better region. But if it means, if Mahidul, I don't know if he means this, maybe he means to destroy Israel and to make it another big sector of ISIS or Al-Quds, ISIS of Sinai, or Al-Qaeda or Islamic Brotherhood, then that's not freeing Palestine. That's just creating more of this repression that really doesn't have any place anymore in the modern world.
Yeah, I mean, the question there is dual, which is, number one, what's holding it back? Meaning, when you say free from what? And the other one is what is this Palestine of which you speak? Right? I mean, because there was no such country. There may be an idea, there may be an identity, a national identity, but then I would want to know what it is that you're unleashing and what that looks like.
I want to also pause right now and say to everybody that we have a special show today with Rav Mike Feuer. We're talking about the Torah portion of Yitro. Rav Mike can be accessed and found. All of his other work, including the Jewish History Show, could be found. The Jewish Story Show, Jewish Story, can be found at jewishstory.co or ravmike.com, including his other work as spiritual counselor, which many friends of mine have availed themselves of. Very useful, very helpful. I've even spoken to somebody recently who told me that you really helped his marriage and made a big difference. So I really want to ask people to check that out and to connect with you. And I also just want to say that we're using a lot of technical innovations here to have the show from this balcony. And it's just great to be with you, Rav Mike, to talk about this great Holy Torah portion, which is about the 10 Commandments. We're about to get to the 10 Commandments. I don't think we're going to get to all 10 of them, but I'd like to just, the verse that I said was such an important verse was really the next one, which is, Vatem, and you, the Jewish people, to Yuli Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. You'll be to me a kingdom of priests or a kingdom of leaders, according to some, v'Goy Kadosh, a holy nation. And this is what you got to tell the Jewish people, as in order to achieve being a Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, this is the Big Ten framework. You want to get there because that's your role. But in order to fulfill that role, you got to hit the Big Ten, and here they are.
And I just want to throw in that the Mamlechet Kohanim, this kingdom of priests or Kohanim, the Ramban says it in a very important way. He says, "To you, Mamlechet Mishartai," right? You are a kingdom of my servants. And I really, really feel that until we as a people, now, not in the abstract, specifically as a nation state planted here in the Middle East, until we accept the fact that that is our zchut kiyum, right? That is what gives us the merit to exist in the world and particularly in our land. So these problems will keep continuing, right? This young man who's calling for free Palestine will only gain traction so long as we fail to realize that we're in the world in order to serve God. And in doing that, to serve the world.
I just want to take a pause and say that Yaakov Walk says snark versus stark, but maybe he meant snark versus stark, right? Stark, right. So stark means, what does stark really means? Like sharp, right?
Yeah. Like on point.
On point. So forget the snark, going forward with the stark. We're about to hit big revelation, Rav Mike Feuer. We're about to get the 10 Commandments, which is really the revelation at Sinai is the penultimate kind of on the continuum from the splitting of the Red Sea. We hit this point of the revelation of Har Sinai, which is the receiving of Torah, which is the most amazing point. And so this is awesome revelation. But I just want to make this quick question to you. Why does it say that, where is it? Why does it say that Moses had to approach God be'av ha'anan, in the thickness of the cloud? He says, "Vayomer Hashem Moshe, hinei anochi ba elecha be'av ha'anan." I hear Hashem said to Moses, "Here I come to you in the thickness of the cloud."
But before I answer, I want to contrast it, right, with a line that you mentioned before, which is actually, I think it's in direct conversation with them, which is that earlier in line 4, he said, "Atem ra'item asher asiti leMitzrayim."
Right.
You saw what I did to Egypt. And Rashi and the other commentators make the point, meaning this wasn't a story you heard. It didn't come to you by witnesses. And on some level, that's important because your experience can trump your understanding. Right? Your experience can trump your understanding. You may not understand how something happened, but you say, okay, well, it happened. We'll work on the how and why later.
I saw it with my eyes.
Right, I saw it with my own eyes. Don't know why. Don't know how. This is the opposite. So God says that what I'm going to give you, Moshe, is going to be so big that it needs to be wrapped in cloud. Because It's going to take your people 3,000-4,000 years to unpack it. And even the limitations of seeing need to be removed. Which is, of course, why famously Am Yisrael responds, Naseh v'nishma, right? The response is, we'll just do it, and then we'll figure it out, right? There's an activist stance, because and this is so important for understanding what Torah is. Torah is not a philosophical system. It's not a set of ideologies which find its expression in abstract perfection and precision of articulation. Well, it has those sides to it. Ultimately, the Torah is an organic system. It finds its perfection in the lived experience of Am Yisrael, engaging the world, which is messy on one hand, but incredibly powerful. And the proof is really in the view that's behind you. like look what we've done. And I'm not just talking about the Mediterranean. I'm talking about the cars and the apartment buildings and the development of the beach, right? That this is a force which moves in the world And there's something mysterious behind it. And that's that avanan. That can't really be seen. It just has to be received and then lived out.
I guess that's the tantalizing dance of revelation. On the one hand, it's darned obvious. It's like if you can't see it, you're blind. And on the other hand, it's purposefully always hidden. It has always a layer that wants to give you doubt or keep you at a question mark, or else the game would be game over. That's what people have to understand. It would be game over if God totally revealed himself. This world would just return back to its spiritual particles. Yeah, because there would be no more game. The whole game.
Right. The God which I can define is not God, and the Torah which I know is not the Torah. Right. These are approximations and our means of relationship. They are not the thing itself.
But by the way, just one point that I saw from Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb of the OU, he pointed out something that I didn't notice. He says that Moses tells the elders. He speaks to the elders, and he says to the elders what God told them to do, and immediately the people are the ones that answer. Meaning to say, the elders. There was going to be here a different bureaucracy, which is okay. We'll tell the elders will tell people, and here the people jumped up and said, no. We're answering directly. We're the ones that want this Torah. We are with you. We don't need any intermediary other than you, Moses. We're here. We're here to get it ourselves. Each one of us. Moses came and he told the elders. He called the elders, and he put it before them. What Hashem told them. The next line says, "V'yanu kol ha'am yachdav." But all the nation answered, "Amen. We're with them. We're on board here." And don't create an elitist, an elite system. This is a national thing. This is a national movement. We're all behind us. I guess that's what populist means, right? So I guess Moses Moses maybe was a shtickle elitist, but the populist sentiment broke through.
No. Populism is at least in the political discourse is negative. Meaning, this is.
I never understand what populism is. I can never figure it out.
I can tell you very simply is that the ideal of democracy is what we call participatory democracy. That every individual actually is empowered to understand, express opinions, and participate in the mechanisms of government. Populism is when one person is able to capture the emotive and sort of psychological experience of people being empowered because they all share an ideal, but it's really one person using that toward its own aims.
I saw that version of the definition, and then I saw an article which seemed to use the word populist in a positive sense. I looked it up on the looking up things, and I saw another version of that word which meant to say as opposed to elitism. You know what? I don't even like that word. I don't even like that word. It never makes exact sense to me. We got the 10 commandments, the big 10. And they are, I am Hashem, your God. Do not have any other gods before me. I think I mentioned this every year. Strong opening. It's really encapsulated in our first line of Kriyat Shema, where we say, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem is our God, Hashem Echad. There's no others but him. He is one. He's unified. So those are the first two commandments. But I want to today focus, I guess, because of our time that we're living in on commandment number 3. Lo tisat Hashem Elokecha l'shav. Do not invoke the name of God, Hashem your God, in vain. Ki lo yinakeh et asher yisa et shmo l'shav. Hashem is not going to cleanse he who will use his name in vain. And I think it's the Ramban that says the reason it's got this very strong counter incentive, right? Mm-hmm. This incentive not
warning,
right? This warning. Why is that? Because people think that speech is not a biggie. It's not a big deal to use things in speech in a lighthearted manner. And God's like, no, actually, commandment number 3 is your speech. Commandment number 3 is your speech. And by the way, commandments of thou shalt not covet is about your thoughts. I want you to control your thoughts. I want you to control your speech. I want you to be not loose with these things that I've given you. I've given you a mind that you could actually, like a muscle, train. I've given you a tongue and a mouth. It's got there's ways that you can zip it So zip it and don't throw out my name as though it's something cheap. And that to me is a fascinating thing, especially for our time where words and truths and narratives are thrown out there, on the cheap. God says, if there's the truth in this world, and by the way, just parenthetically, and then I'll let you comment on this. That a lot of times I say to people, I don't like the word peace today because the word peace is a lot of times not what it sounds like it means. It actually means the Jewish people being weak, giving up our land, and entering into endless war by empowering evil folks. So I don't like to use the word peace. People are like, but peace is the name of God. Shalom is one of the names of God. I go, exactly.
Yes.
Don't throw that word around. It has a meaning and has a purpose, has a place. Don't just use it willy-nilly because that's not actually what peace means. That's not how you use God's name. And what do you think about that?
Well, that's what really touches me, the last piece you said, because speech in general, I'm definitely a believer that it deserves far more gravity and precision and attention to its value. But in particular, this is lo tisa Hashem Hashem, right? This is that it's the name of God, because here is a more fundamental problem than peace, is that if you start manipulating God for your purposes in the ears of others, then you risk undermining the Torah altogether. And whether it's, as a religious person claiming your religion as a justification for, negative behavior, which unfortunately does happen, or whether it's a failure to appreciate the fact that as soon as you use God's name in your speech, everything you do represents God in the world.
Right.
Or even, worse, even God forbid, is that, and I have to admit, I'm mystified by some of the behavior of the deeply religious, section of our society, who fails to appreciate that, that, like it or not, people judge God by our behavior. And so if you're going to do something, do it in your own name. And if you're going to do it in the name of God, you better make sure it's not l'shav. It's not an empty action, or even worse, God forbid. I think this deserves a lot of thought, because especially in a time of media where everybody's watching and people are all looking to be outraged, right? The warning here needs to be a real cautionary note.
Right. It's a great point you're making. I want to add one experience that I had in life which really, really affected my thinking about these things, and that is that I have had the merit to help put up big Israeli flags in different places in Israel, including in Hebron, including on the Mount of Olives, and paid for flags and paid for poles and stuff like that, which friends and listeners of the show have helped to fund as well. So one thing that I've learned about flags is putting up a flag is a big responsibility, because once that flag is up, you got to make sure that flag never gets tattered, because a beautiful flapping flag is a beautiful thing, especially when it's the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the flag of Israel, which is the flag of God. But if you let that same flag get tattered, that very same flag that you put up is now a chilul Hashem. It looks bad. It does not look good for Israel, for the Jewish people, or for God. And so therefore, the minute and I always say this to people, it's a crazy phrase that I made up, which is, the minute you work for Kiddush Hashem, you're a candidate for chilul Hashem. Absolutely. Okay? And so if you're a great rabbi, if you falter at a very human faltering, that looks bad for God and looks bad for the Jewish people. So you were doing Kiddush Hashem, you become a chilul Hashem. It's that easy. Now I understand through that experience of putting up a flag what Moses is. Like Moses, the higher he goes, the less room there is maneuver for him to even falter just a little bit, lest it be seen as a chilul Hashem. So that does not mean that we should not be proud and unafraid to do Kiddush Hashem. It just means that responsibility's got to run deep. It can't be just one flag that you put up. Once you put up that flag, it's a lifetime commitment to making sure that flag looks great. Once you become a person who represents God in this world, you better do it deeply and follow it all the way through.
It can never be l'shav. Yep, absolutely.
Great, awesome. Okay, we've done an hour, and I want to thank you again, Rav Mike, for being with me today. You're on fire today, and God bless you for a great Shabbat, you and your family, and all of the Jewish people. So thank you so much for being with us today. One last point I wanted to make, which is right at the end of the Torah portion of Yitro, God says to Moses and basically to the Jewish people, you saw, atem ra'item, ki mina shamayim dibarti imachem. You saw that I spoke to you from the heavens. And therefore, if I spoke to you from the heavens, therefore, lo tasuni ti Elohei kesef ve'Elohei zahav. Don't make together with me a god of silver or money or a god of gold. Lo tasuchem. Don't do it for you. It's certainly not for me. Rather, mizbech adama taseli. You should make for me an earthen tabernacle, an earthen altar. Thank you.
That's your word,
right.
dude.
You know, it's a thing. Thank you.
Coming.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So God, he juxtaposes, the Torah juxtaposes, like, I spoke to you from heaven. So make me an earthen altar, okay? Make me an earthen altar. I'm up there. So don't try to appease me with all kinds of high stuff. Keep it low. Keep it lowly. I'll respect that. And then the very last phrase is, if you indeed make me an altar of stones, don't chisel it with a sword. And it says, the very last line of this Torah portion, which is my favorite, it says, "V'lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi." Don't walk up stairs on my altar, asher lo tegaler avatcha alav, which your nakedness can show. If you go up a staircase, when your pants move, your nakedness may show. So the halachic ruling on that is make a ramp. But the way I read this verse is, lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi. Don't walk on my altar with ma'alot, with your highness. Mm-hmm. You walk with your haughtiness. Why? Because if you do, asher lo tegaler avatcha alav, when you walk with haughtiness on my altar, it's going to show your lowest, your base, the fact that you're just a small human. I spoke to you from the highest heavens. Make for me an altar of humility. Make for me an altar of earthenware, of stones. Don't show off. Just like before, if you're going to be cool, do it in the service of God. But really, know your place. You have limited time. You're made from earth yourself. You're going back to the earth. If you have the great merit to serve me, do it with humility.
I mean, I couldn't agree more that the connection that's being made here goes back to the essence of humanity, like you kind of referred to there, is that Adam was made min ha'adama. So the humanity was made from the earth of the ground, and beyond the humility element, I think it's also important to recognize that means that the ultimate altar upon which a person is meant to serve God is their self. That now that we don't merit to have the altar in the temple, nonetheless, there is the ability to see our very selves as this earthen altar upon which we can do divine service. So don't wait to do the work. Wherever you are, whoever you're with, whatever the situation, ask yourself, how is it that I can serve God in this moment? And that's what will make us really into this Mamlechet Kohanim, Goy Kadosh, this holy people and a kingdom of divine servants who will please God, be able to spread the light of Torah to the whole world.
Awesome. Erica from Sweden writes, if it would be possible, I would love to exchange some of the snow for your son. I love sun more than cold, and snow, it's even if it's beautiful. And with that, I think that I don't know if I can send. I don't know if Rabbi Mike, Rav Mike, and I can send you any sun, but we can send you the blessings of Hashem from the land of Israel, and where you are in the desert, Rav Mike and myself here on the coast, using this incredible technology to share the most hallowed and ancient of truths, and this Torah, which in this Torah portion we also learn is got to be fresh hayom, today. It has to be like it's given to you today, and it's got to have that vitality and that energy. When you feel the vitality of of Mount Sinai given to you today, that's an amazing blessing in your home. And in this week's Torah portion, it also says, I'll give you a blessing to say my name. Wherever I give you permission to say my name, I will enter your house and bless you. And so I want to bless everybody out there that's listening, that's together with us, to really feel, look at that picture of the land of Israel. Look at your mezuzah if you have one. Open up the Torah or the Bible if you have one. Say the name of God in your house. Draw God into your home and feel the blessings that we're sending you here from the land of blessings.
Amen.
Rav Mike Feuer, thank you so much for joining me on this beautiful day.
Always
the land
pleasure.
of Israel. You are awesome. God bless you and Shabbat Shalom.
God bless. Shabbat Shalom.
All right, everybody. Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Rav Mike, thank you. And I'm sending you all the good things from this great time and this great land. Lots of love and lots of blessings from the land of blessings. And Shalom. All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleischer Show. Being with Rav Mike from the Mediterranean was really, really fun and special. And I even got a little bit of a sunburn while standing in the sun. You could see it on my Facebook page and on YouTube, on Twitter, all at Yishai Fleischer. And I got a little bit of a sunburn. You know, when you're dealing with that powerful Torah, you might get burnt. And I do want to thank the folks that make the show possible, which is, of course, first God Almighty and Malka Fleischer that keeps me in line. Thank you for that. I want to thank all the listeners and all the support, the donations that come in through YishaiFleischer.com. And we're going to be opening a Patreon page soon. And if you go to Amazon Smiles, if you ever give through Amazon Smiles, Kuma is the organization, Kumah. That's our organization, which is our 501c3, which gives us the Amazon Smiles charitable status. And of course, thank you to the Land of Israel Network that has so many great shows. And Ari and Jeremy are amazing people that have started this wonderful network. And thank you to all my sponsors. Let's just talk about them very quickly. First, I guess the amazing sponsor that I want to talk to you about today is Prohibition Pickle. And the reason I'm so amazed by it is because my man Chaim has just opened up Prohibition Pickle as an Ashkenazi revival restaurant, like you think you're on the Lower East Side in Gush Etzion in Judea. And that is pretty darn cool. So congratulations to Prohibition Pickle. They still deliver pickles and salami. I'm a salami man. Yep, I tell the truth today. Maybe I'm embarrassed, but I'm a salami guy. With hot sauce, with mayo and all the stuff, mustard on rye. So check out Prohibition Pickle. They do great stuff. Check out Blessed by Israel. Blessed by Israel is a great way for you to support Israel, but also to get Israel into your life or into somebody else's life by sending a product from Israel to anywhere around the world. Blessed by BUI Israel. Coupon code Yishai gets you 12% off. The good folks at the Hebron Fund, they keep the Jewish community of Hebron alive and well and strong and touristy and welcoming and keep the tombs of the fathers and mothers safe and beautiful. That's hebronfund.org, and that's where I have the pleasure of working. So the Jewish community of Hebron is the most incredible and special avant-garde, the forward protector of our people's most important heritage, which is our fathers and mothers, other than Yerushalayim, of course, which is the temple, and hopefully the third temple soon. And I want to thank the good folks at Tchelet who make this incredible blue dye from snails that has returned us to looking like the way we used to look 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. That's the biblical blue, which is back, Tchelet, TEKHELET.com. And after spending some time in the sun, I'm going to need some salves from my beard. I need some Aleph Male. And if you've used Aleph Male, you know it's awesome, smells great, keeps your beard Jewishly rocking, and turns you from just a plain rabbi to a sage, from plain rabbi to a chacham, and that is some Hebrew masculinity, not toxic, but in fact organic masculinity from Judea. I like that, organic masculinity from Judea. That's going to be the line. So check them out at alephmail.com, coupon code Yishai10, and also check out Salves of Jerusalem. Right? If you want that soul glow, if you want that spiritual good skin, reflecting your inner beauty, reflected outwards, and use physicality for the purpose of spirituality. So check out salvesofjerusalem.com. Coupon code Yishai gets you 10% off and gets you a great product right from the land of Israel with all the Judean stuff on your face, on your skin, and in your life. So that's some of my great sponsors. I also want to thank Ben Bresky, Tabitha, Yocheved, and Moshe Herman for helping produce the show and get it out to you. They are magical people who are part of the effort to send the light of Israel to the world. I thank you guys so much love for your great efforts and for all the great production value that we bring to the show. And with that, I want to thank again the God of Israel, the land of Israel, the Torah of Israel, and of course the God of Israel, who's the real producer of everything that we do. Thank you so much for the opportunity to just be alive in this great time. Coming up right now is my discussion with Knesset member Michal Cotler-Wunch. She was formerly from the Blue and White Party. She's still a Knesset member, but has separated herself from that party. But in any case, an expert in international law, and we discussed the future of Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, the so-called settlements, which really means Jewish communities in the most organic and natural place that could be in Judea. We discussed their future in international law on a Zoom debate that was on my Facebook page as well, and moderated by the great broadcaster Avi Abelo. So without further ado, here's myself and Knesset member Michal, an advocate, Michal Cotler-Wunch.
Shalom, shalom everybody, and welcome to a special evening of dialogue between Israeli MK Michal Cotler-Wunch and international spokesperson for Hebron, Yishai Fleischer. This evening, we are going to be talking about Judea and Samaria, sovereignty, law, and identity. As everyone probably knows, Israel, thank God, liberated the areas of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, back in 1967, the miraculous 1967 war. And still today, 50 plus years later, this status, unfortunately, is still in limbo, as we have over 500,000 Jews resettling in our ancestral biblical homeland. And these are issues that the status of Judea and Samaria, Jews, our Arab neighbors who we live in the same vicinity with in this land, are still open. And we're going to be discussing this evening with these two very important individuals. So let's get right to it. And Michal, and why don't we start with you? Sovereignty and international law in Judea and Samaria. Let's just start out, no question, just what are your thoughts on the matter?
Well, that question throws me straight to the San Remo conference, actually, of 1920. I think we have to begin it there. You know, obviously the San Remo conference basically reaffirming the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the importance of understanding and knowing our facts as we engage, and starting from that point in order to understand that when we engage international law and affirm the foundational principles of international law in that way, then we have to begin there. When we don't, then we really err on the side of huge gaps in both understanding and the ability to bridge gaps, and to the detriment of all, I would argue, Jews, Arabs, the international understanding of the challenge that we are currently still facing. And the one more thing I would say about that, and I say this as a lawyer, is I'm a great believer that there is real harm in a gap between the law and reality. So whether we talk about application of law or sovereignty, and when we look at reality on the ground, and you referred to 500,000 Jews living alongside Arab neighbors, it is to the detriment of all Jews and Arabs alike when there is a gap between the legal status and the reality. And you, Yishai, can attest to the everyday manifestations of what I just said, with multiple examples that affect everybody's lives, as I said, Jews and Arabs alike. And I believe that it is not only imperative, but opportune, and possibly even, a historic moment with which we can begin to engage and propel this forward. And I'd love to hear from Yishai, but we can engage more deeply on the significance of the Abraham Accords on this question, and the opportunity inherent to the Abraham Accords in terms of the paradigm shift that they embody, that they represent, with a real historic pivot away from the three no's of the 1967 Khartoum conference: no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiation with Israel, no to peace with Israel, to the three yeses: yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, yes to peace, in that order. And I cannot but speak to the importance of understanding that recognition, as we speak about Hebron, as we speak about Judea and Samaria, recognition is the recognition of the other's right to exist from an international law perspective, granting agency with equal rights and responsibilities to both parties that mutually recognize one another. In Israel's case, recognition of Israel's right to exist as Jewish and democratic, the return of an indigenous peoples to its ancestral homeland after thousands of years of exile, and everything that implies. And when I say the real historic paradigmal shift, first of all, it's only potential. It's potential because we have to identify and realize that potential. It harbors that potential, but we have to acknowledge the importance of recognition there. And that is what can pave the path forward as we address the challenges with regards to sovereignty or application of law in Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that you did bring up the San Remo Accords, the conference, because many people out there in the world today still question, wait, do the Jews even have rights, legal rights, according to international law, to these ancestral lands of ours in Judea and Samaria? And that is the San Remo Accords. And for those not familiar with it, Google it, but that really is the basis of modern international legal rights for the Jewish people for these lands. So, Yishai, what your thoughts? Let's get going. What do you say about sovereignty and international law with regards to Judea and Samaria?
Before I get settled into the issues that I'm so passionate about, we're so passionate about, I think it's I want to say thanks for this great forum. Avi, thanks for hosting us. You're doing great work in broadcasting, and Michal Cotler-Wunch is a fabulous Knesset member who has done great work in her short time in Knesset, and we hope to see you in the next Knesset, but also comes from a family who's done great things for the Jewish people, including her stepfather, Erwin Cutler, who was the justice minister, and held many other in Canada. That's right. In Canada, I was going to get to that. And your mom also, who served as the parliamentary secretary for Menachem Begin's Gachal and then Likud parties. That's a pretty political family. And now you're a Knesset member in Israel. That's really great. So it's fun to be with both of you to talk about these things. And I feel like kind of the weight of history behind us. With regarding to Judea and Samaria, it's so funny because things are sometimes backwards. The center of Israel today, what they call the center is Tel Aviv, and it's a great and beautiful metropolitan area, great metropolis. But in biblical times, it was like this was the land of the Philistines. And ironically, Judea and Samaria was the biblical heartland. When I say biblical heartland, it doesn't just mean, stories of faraway times. It really is the core of our history, where the name, for example, Jewish comes from. It's from the tribe of Judah, which the Persian Empire recognized as the Jewish state. That word Jewish state is a very ancient word. It was called Yehud Medinta, the Jewish state in the Persian Empire, the kind of the area that was under the sovereignty of the Jews, and we're really from here. So the basis of all of our identity is in Judea and Samaria. If it's cities like Bethlehem, which King David was born in, or Beit El, where Jacob had his dream of the ladder, or Hebron, where I have the great privilege of working, and that is the tombs of the forefathers and mothers. So it's Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. They're all buried there. And it was also the place, the reason they're buried there is because it's also the place of the first purchase of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So your stepfather was the justice minister in Canada. I saw a female justice minister, Ayelet Shaked, in Israel, come to Hebron and declare, now she's ostensibly secular. I think she's traditional. But in any case, she clearly stated that we have legal rights to this place, Hebron, because the Bible tells us that our forefather Abraham purchased this in a legal tender purchase. And so, it's something very powerful, very historical. It's really the root of our identity in so many ways. And yet today we face a battle to undermine that very identity. I think that our enemies are actually very smart and have a great sensitivity to what makes up the Jewish people and what's their core and root identity. And so they've been waging a war. Now that war was a physical war. In 1948, Israel declared independence. As per the San Remo Accords, which you explained, Knesset member Michal, you explained that it was a continuation or the solidifying of international law behind the Balfour Declaration. And then later on, the UN said what it said, but the point is it recognized that the Jews have a right to a state one way or another. We declared a state and a war was foisted upon us we lost the heartland for 19 years under Jordanian occupation. They pushed in, they took away places like the Temple Mount, like the Western Wall, like the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. They took away Hebron. They destroyed Jewish remnants there, took Jewish property, put in schools, erased any Jewish kind of signature markers there, destroyed the synagogues. They destroyed, I think, 55 synagogues in the Old City in Jerusalem, and the few synagogues that we had in Hebron. They were all destroyed with the purpose of erasing that connection and that identity. After the 6-Day War, we returned. You said, Avi, you said miraculously, but it was an initial miracle. But since then, it's been a slog to try to come back to the places that really make up who we are. We're still fighting that battle in Hebron, and we fight that battle against the enemies of Israel. They might be some members of the EU. They might be some members of the United Nations. They might be some jihadist associated organizations that masquerade as human rights organizations. And sadly, they are sometimes even mechanisms within the state of Israel, which basically have got some kind of idea in their head that somehow we're not going to be sovereign in these places in the long run, which is absolutely not the case. And so in communities in Judea and Samaria, like in Hebron, we're fighting all the time to get our own state to give us permits to build, to recognize our rights, to make sure that electricity and security and water are given to residents and citizens of the Jewish state that live in the Israeli heartland, but have somehow been relegated to second-class citizens. So the fight is still very much on. And I'll just make one last point, is that that fight is against all these kind of forces, recalcitrant forces. Sometimes what they use is what I call national identity theft, or the worst kind of cultural appropriation, in which places like the Tomb of the Fathers and Mothers in Hebron was named by UNESCO a Palestinian World Heritage Site under threat from Israel. Now, luckily, the Trump administration with Nikki Haley at the helm as a UN ambassador pulled out of UNESCO specifically because of the anti-Hebron decision, and Israel followed suit. There's a narrative war attack on our history and our rights in this land, and we desperately need Knesset members like yourself, Michal, and friends of Israel to stand behind our rights in our ancestral homeland.
So let's take that forward, because based on what both of you are saying on the reality and the international law that we have our rights, Israel, to be here, the Abraham Accords, the first time that there has been a diplomatic plan that was not based solely on the two-state solution model. Right now, it was never implemented. But still, what impact do you believe the introduction of the Abraham Accords had or is having? Is it the right direction, or are we supposed to go back to the plain vanilla two-state solution model, which we'll get into afterwards, unless you get into it right now, which the new Biden administration is probably going to be returning to? So, Michal.
Yeah. So I mean, I started to refer to it before in the sense that I believe that the potential of the paradigm shift requires, or to realize that potential requires, that we identify what is that paradigm shift. And when I drew out that order of recognition that enables negotiation, thereby enabling peace, long-lasting peace and prosperity to all peoples. And by the way, I differentiate peoples from leadership, because I think that what's unique about the Abraham Accords and the warmth that we feel with the people in the UAE, with Bahrain, of Morocco, and it is that, and it's something that we shouldn't skip over. It is that recognition has also been translated into the consciousness of people. So through education. So the curriculum of the UAE began talking about tolerance and about coexistence before the Abraham Accords was signed, and the Abraham Accords are already integrated into curriculum. Now, when you think about that, it seems so basic, right? The recognition of another person's right to exist as who they are. That is essentially all I've said. It's so basic, but it has fundamentally changed the order of things, because whether you talk about, two states, autonomy plus, state minus, whatever it is, the order that was cast upon us was make peace and then negotiate what it'll look like, and then maybe you can recognize one another. That doesn't make any sense, right? That is the shift that I'm referring to, or the flipping of the paradigm, if you will. And I think it also lights the path forward to all peoples in the region and beyond that are willing to undergo that, sort of process, as I've identified, that requires first the recognition, the basic right to mutual recognition of each other's right to exist as who we are. And I want to relate a little bit to what Yishai talked about, and that is identity. I think that we're in the midst, and I'll say this from my perspective also, as a member of Knesset in the multiple committees that I sit on, but also in the Committee on Foreign Relations and Security. I think that we are in the midst of a war that was waged on the state of Israel, and we can, decide that it was waged with Zionism as racism, or that it was waged in 2001 in Durban, but a war that was waged on the international front for the hearts and the minds and public opinion of the international community, utilizing legal tools and its mechanisms and institutions. So Yishai talked about UNESCO, and I can talk about the ICC, and we could talk about the UN that just passed 17 resolutions against one state, the state of Israel, and 7 against the remainder of the world. Venezuela and North Korea and Syria and Iran, and you name them, 7. So when we see that happening, actually, and when I engage on this topic, and I believe that this is a very important topic to engage with the incoming administration in the US. When I engage on this topic, I actually address it from the perspective of the responsibility and accountability of all trustees of international law and human rights, not for the state of Israel, and certainly not for the Jews, but as trustees of international law and human rights, to identify and expose and address the double standards that ultimately enable the culture of impunity, empower the culture of impunity, of terror regimes, not only in our region, but beyond, be it Hamas in Gaza, Iran and the people of Iran. And I differentiate, again, the regimes from the peoples, Syria, the Syrian regime and the people of Syria, and beyond. We could talk about the Uyghurs in China and, and the lack of accountability for which the Chinese government is being held for subjecting 1 million people to awful human rights violations, and the silence of the world. And I don't want to quote Elie Wiesel and all the greats, and tomorrow we mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day. So the prospective promise, commitment to never again, it's not about the past. It's not about us. It's the prospective purpose, the prospective promise and commitment of the international community, utilizing international law, reaffirming international law, and securing the rights of all peoples around the world. The only way to do that is to identify and expose the double standards. And the state of Israel is really just the canary in the mine shaft. I say this all the time. We can utilize this in order to track the way that double standards work, but we have to understand, and our friends and our foes around the world, they speak this language, and I do not mean English. I mean the language of rights, the lingua franca, spoken, as Yishai said, by both our friends and our foes, both intentionally and ignorantly. It doesn't matter. The imperative and the responsibility, and I take this responsibility very seriously as an Israeli legislator, is to make my messaging accessible. When we speak the language of security, nobody can understand that. Nobody can understand Israel's security needs, as legitimate as they are. But they can understand it when we learn to utilize the language of rights, reaffirming international law to which we are committed, which we uphold, promote, and protect, and reaffirming it, utilizing the language of rights so that we can enable both our friends and respond to our foes in a language that is understood by all, including the imperative to both hold to account for the implementation or use of double standards, but also the silence or the enablement of those double standards to persist as we identify them, as we expose them. So the Abraham Accords, in many ways, are an incredible path forward for all peoples in the region, as I said, including with our most immediate neighbors, with the Palestinians. And they set the path. The path is one of recognition. Recognition requires an end of incitement. It requires an end of pay for slay. Those cannot coexist. You cannot recognize another person's right to exist while you are inciting and subjecting your own children to human rights violations by teaching them hate from the age of 2. You just can't. And so we have a tremendous possibility now. And the one more thing that the Abraham Accords do, other than, of course, their names attests to the fact that we transcend any differences, perceived or real, between us and focus on our shared values of the Abrahamic faiths. And of course, the shared interest in the region as well. But the one more thing that they do is they identify the new alliances. So when you look carefully as to who rejected the Abraham Accords, refuses to recognize them, and does so vociferously, by the way, including in our own Knesset, that is a huge, huge moment of understanding, and I believe also a way forward for us internally. So Israeli Arabs that are looking for integration and do not find representation anymore, they are happy to go visit Abu Dhabi and Bahrain. They were the first there. Of the tens of thousands of Israelis, about half were Israeli Arabs. It's very important that we recognize that opportunity and reach and extend our hand out and empower the voices of moderation. With moderation comes a tremendous amount of responsibility. But the incredible thing is that we are, I think, living at a historic time that enables us to see the power of moderation. And that power of moderation and the marking of the axis of radicalism enables Islam to take back Islam, right? From radicalization of Islam, from extremism of Islam. I mean, it is an all-around win-win-win if we manage to realize the potential paradigmal shift that is inherent to the Abraham Accords. That comes with a great deal of responsibility and not taking our eye off the ball, and not only looking at shared interests, business or entrepreneurship or technology, and those are all great things, but we should not miss the foundational understanding that has shifted the way, and tectonic shifts and changes of the way that the Middle East and beyond can actually benefit from the Abraham Accords. I hope I didn't speak too long.
Everything you said was very, very important to be said and to be heard. So thank you, Michal. And anecdotally, just with you raising the impact of the Abraham Accords with these normalization deals with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain with Israel, its impact on the Israeli Arab population. I mean, there are commentators out there saying that right now, more and more Arab Israelis are thinking of not voting for their joint Arab list party in the upcoming elections because they are disappointed that their own representatives came out publicly against those normalization deals between Israel and these Arab Muslim countries, and therefore they are thinking of voting for other Jewish majority parties, which very interesting development if that actually does happen. But now to you, Yishai, I know
just butt in and just if we turn that sort of the paradigmal shift inwards, right? Yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, yes to peace, inwards into Israeli society internally, and the implementation of that recognition and what that means, then exactly what you just said, Avi, that is in fact the possibility for us to create these reconciliation mechanisms internally in the state of Israel, and enables and empowers the voices of moderation that are actually ready for that kind of recognition as a first step.
Right, 100%. Okay, so Yishai, I know you are a very big proponent of explaining the Abraham Accords power as a huge paradigm shift for the reality, for the Middle East, for Israel, for the whole peace process. Please explain to us what you mean by that paradigm shift, and again, your insight into whether we're going to be seeing a change of moving away from that, or will it hold even with a change with this new Biden administration?
All right, so these are very powerful issues. The Abraham Accords are certainly a big boon to Israel's legitimacy in the region. The very name Abraham Accords themselves are a useful paradigm shift, just the name itself, because the main lie that is perpetuated on Canadian campus, on American campus, in the media, and in international organizations is that Israel is an occupier in Judea and Samaria in the so-called West Bank. And by saying that we're an occupier, if you actually look at the Palestinian Authority maps, they don't just mean in Judea and Samaria, they actually mean in the land of Israel per se. And so therefore, we're just like a foreign entity, a white European interloper. We're a colonialist state, an apartheid state, and they have all this language. They have it down pat. The minute you use the language of Abraham Accords, it's exactly the opposite of the term occupation. and colonialization. Why? Because we're an ancient people on this land. We have something that brings us together, which is Father Abraham. And so just the very term itself heals the perception of occupation and colonialization, just because it's like, no, we're an ethnic indigenous people in this land. And we are like the Arabs. We have a Semitic language. We have a similar religion. We have a similar genetic code. We're from here. They're from here. We have a joint father. It just changes the whole narrative. So that's issue number one. And that's actually not a small issue, because delegitimization is one of the main tactics, one of the two main tactics that the Palestinian Authorities engaged in today. And we'll get to the second tactic in a second. The other aspect of the Abraham Accords, which is so important on the international scene, is that we've all seen that video of Secretary of State Kerry talking about the fact that there will never, ever, ever, ever be Arab recognition of Israel without solving the Palestinian problem, without solving that intractable issue. And he just was so vociferous and cocksure of himself. And it turned out to be false. It turns out that Israel engaging in a two-state solution or one-state solution, giving up the land, not giving up the land, that's actually not the most pertinent thing in the Middle East. People want progress. They want technological progress. They want defense. They want trade. They want tourism. They want normalization. And they're starting to finally see, back to the narrative question, that Israel's part of the region. It's a Semitic country, a country that is like the Arab countries in many ways. And so we have a land problem, a land conflict with the Palestinians, but it's not everything. And therefore the Arab countries say, we can now start to accept Israel. Okay, so there's a problem with some of our brothers, but that's not everything. And that was actually a huge step forward, because we were constantly getting stuck on this one issue. I think that we can't use the word Abraham Accords without thanking, I think, the Trump administration. Maybe that's not so popular everywhere, but I don't really care, because I think it's incredibly important to show gratitude to people who worked really hard to change the scene. And I think that Secretary of State Pompeo, of which he enunciated the doctrine that Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria is no longer seen as per se illegal under international law. That was actually one of the happiest days of my life. I was in a Florida airport, and I was just sitting there getting ready to get on a flight back home, or whatever, on the way home, maybe to New York and then home. And then I heard this news, and it was just such an explosion of joy, because finally the United States, now this doesn't mean that we all depended on their recognition of it. It's not like we lived our life waiting for America to recognize our rights. No, we fought for our rights. We have self-determination. But finally, the lie that Jewish people are somehow illegal under international law, or somehow foreigners in our ancestral homeland, this absurd lie was finally getting pushed out of the way. And I think we owe Secretary of State Pompeo and the whole team there a debt of gratitude. But the one thing that I guess, in order to throw in a little spice here into our discussion, that I want to slightly disagree with Knesset member Michal Cotler-Wunch, is that I think that talking a lot about international law and the double standards, that'll only take you so far, because in the end, Israel has to act like a sovereign, not just to announce sovereignty, to declare sovereignty, to have other people recognize our sovereignty. Those are all nice things, but you have to act like a sovereign. For example, the land in Judea and Samaria, in the so-called West Bank, the parts that are Area C, people like myself think that areas A, B, and C all belong to the Jewish people and should belong to the state of Israel. But even under all agreements between us and the Palestinian Authority, we all understand that Area C is Jewish Israeli land, meant to always stay under Jewish Israeli sovereignty, and so recognized now by the United States. But that land is being systematically taken over. And this is part two of the Palestinian Authority's war on Israel. One is delegitimization. The other one is a subtle but daily land theft, encroachment, supported by our friends, quote unquote, at the UN, at the EU, and I mean supported financially, to the detriment of our land daily. I see it out my window. I see it on my drives to Hebron, Judea. The areas C within Judea are being taken over all the time, and our beloved state of Israel and our beloved government is often slow in reacting to this land theft and asserting the sovereignty. Now, when I say asserting sovereignty, it does not mean we're sovereigns, here's the sign. It means making sure to defend against land theft. It means making sure that's not going to happen on the day-to-day basis, because it happens quietly with another little olive tree field being planted. It happens when a little hut is put down in a place called Khan al-Ahmar. And if the state of Israel is not going to take care of that, they're not acting like a sovereign. So look, international law and all that is fine, and it's important, and it's one of the bases for our rights in the land of Israel. The other ones include purchase. We've purchased a lot of the land in the land of Israel. We fought defensive wars and won that land. I think another case can be made that we've beautified this land and put in a lot of money and effort into it. That's maybe a loci of rights for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And also, we're the indigenous people. And if you want to add a religious argument, we have God on our side. He told us this is our land as well, if you want to go in that direction. But all those things and all the international agreements and understandings and the fighting against double standards will not stand if the state of Israel is weak on the ground. That's just the way it is. The other folks will never, even if you point out their hypocrisy and double standard, they will never ensure our rights in this land. They will never make sure it happens. Now, we have been fighting in the last few months to recognize some of the small Jewish communities that have been built up in Judea and Samaria on state land. They were centered by the state of Israel for the last 20 years, and yet 25,000 people in about 70 small communities have not been given their full rights as citizens and communities within the state of Israel. We've been fighting for that. That law did not pass. And some people in Michal's party were with us, and some people were against us, and some people abstained. We need very much to act like a sovereign in order for real sovereignty to take place. And that Avi and Michal, is what actually led to the Abraham Accords. It's Israeli strength. It's the understanding in the Arab world that these guys aren't going anywhere. When we're acting wishy-washy, they smell it, and they understand that we're here for a short amount of time and that we'll be gone like the other various conquerors that came and went. They have to know that we are here to stay. We have to act like folks that are here to stay. And that is the basis for negotiations, for the Abraham Accords, for recognition. It's through our strength that other people will understand that we mean business, and then they'll come to make peace with us.
So before we go to our question or issue, I'd love, Michal, if you answer, since Yishai raised the point directly to you. And I'll just add in, there is independent investigative journalist Edwin Black, famous for IBM and the Holocaust, the book. He came up with a very, very comprehensive investigative report showing how the European Union and its countries have invested tens of billions of dollars, if I'm not mistaken, in Palestinian Authority projects to take over and build up homes, infrastructure, and roads, specifically in Area C, going against their own signatures on the Oslo Accords, which basically gives Israel sovereign rights to Area C. So again, Michal, please answer Yishai's point.
Yeah,
please.
So I'll just say this is exactly where I come to it using the principles of international law. Sovereignty is a principle of international law, and in fact, the imperative to assert our sovereignty is one that has actually probably what led me into Knesset as somebody who represented, the golden case and cause, exactly with regards to the sovereignty on the issues of the challenges on the border of Gaza and all related issues that we could get into a little bit later. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Yishai's case with regards to sovereignty. And literally today at a Knesset hearing, and I could have been saying the exact same words about applying sovereignty or about sovereignty as a state of mind, not just a matter of geography. And sovereignty is a state of mind. And maybe this is a little bit of a psychology of a people that was exiled for thousands of years and is not sure what sovereignty exactly means. But sovereignty as an international law principle, not just in Judea and Samaria or beyond or any part or any side of the Green Line. What we see happening in Lod, what we see happening with agricultural crime, what we see happening in the Golan with the theft, or in the Negev with the theft of ammunition from army bases. Those are all issues of the imperative to apply sovereignty and meshilut, governance, good governance. And when I come to these issues, utilizing, again, the language or the principles of international law, that reaffirms that Israel, as one of the nations and a member of the family of nations, has the very same rights and obligations as do other countries. And there is no other country in the world that is asked not to represent its own sovereignty in any of these cases. And I'll say about the imperative to apply that sovereignty and to implement that sovereignty and to go through the processes, the legal processes necessary in order to create that transparent process and the certainty of creating, whether it's the smaller outposts that are legal. And again, whatever is legal needs to be legalized, right? That's the point of something being legal. But there are processes that exist and we have not implemented. I agree with Yishai 100%. And certainly, everything that the large communities and that aren't even part and parcel for any agreement that may come in the future have to be, sovereignty has to be applied there. I will say, Yishai, that, sadly, as you know, Blue and White has imploded, and I will not be running with Blue and White in the next elections. But there were moments where the discussions around the table sadly led Blue and White to making all kinds of decisions. But I'll say that having the perspective of international law is actually, for me, what founded my understanding of the imperative for that kind of sovereignty. And you did bring up the European government-funded NGOs involved in the delegitimization campaign. I want to say that with regards to that war, from which we are absent, that war on the delegitimization, it's not just the double standards. Certainly, the demonization and delegitimization are a big part of the war waged against the state of Israel. Indeed, supported by European countries. Indeed, supporting terror organizations. Indeed, flooding our courts with funded cases against the state of Israel, right, and against Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria, and indeed funding terror organizations, including those that we know to make accessible to those countries in the sense that they have to be held to account, for example, for the murder of Renash Schnerb. And so it exactly makes the case of the importance of affirming international law and utilizing the language of rights to make exactly the points that I believe you've made. It also includes, for example, the UN blacklist, right? I visited a date farm, just as soon as I entered Knesset, in fact, that appears on the organic, right? It's called Zorganica, the organic dates that are no longer able to sell their beautiful organic dates in all kinds of fancy stores like Marks and Spencer because of the UN blacklist, which actually we're expecting will be updated shortly. And so it's not just the Palestinian Authority project, it's also NGO funding and so forth. Now, when we affirm international law and utilize the language of rights, then we can call out those countries. We can call out that funding. And again, as a parliamentarian, I think we have tremendous responsibility to do so in our engagements, whether formal or informal, with our fellow parliamentarians around the world, and also hold them to account, for example, for funding, Palestinian textbooks that teach hate and incitement and terror and so on. So I don't think we have a disagreement there at all. I would just argue. I
agree with you. We don't have a disagreement, but still, it's not going to be international law that's going to stop that funding going to the Palestinian Authority. It's going to be police action, Israeli strength. And by the way, I studied international law at law school as well, at Cardozo Law, and I was very instrumental in the UNESCO pullout by the United States. So, and that was a great narrative war victory. That was one of the greatest victories that I was ever engaged in. So I agree with you. There's definitely a place to play within the framework of international law, but it's just not everything, because at the end of the day, what they really respect, I hate to kind of say it in a cliche way, but at the end, what they respect is Israeli strength. And at the end, the Pompeo Doctrine only worked because there were communities in Judea and Samaria. Had we waited around for the world to so-called give us our rights, it would have never happened. We have to act like a sovereign in what is our sovereign land. Pronouncements are way less important than true action in the field. And by the way, there are so many Palestinians, and I meet them all the time. Sadly, I can't take a picture with them, because if I take a picture with them, this thuggish regime will come down on them like they did on Muhammad Jaber, who took a picture. Our neighbor in Hebron, Muhammad Jaber, who is an Ahmadi Palestinian who became friendly to Israel after actually serving time in Israeli prison for being a terrorist, like reformed himself, changed direction in his religious understanding, invited Knesset member Yehuda Glick, Rabbi Yehuda Glick, to come to his house and took a picture of him when they were breaking bread and at an iftar meal. He was soon invited to have a chat with the Palestinian authorities, police, and then taken to prison for 60 days in Jericho. And let's just say was not treated very nicely, came back with a limp and a lisp, and no longer really accepts groups in his house for fear. And this is a guy who lives right next to us. It's just horrific. I always say to people, we Jews, we Israelis, we live in South Korea, and our next door neighbor, the Palestinians, they live in North Korea. And for me, the one greatest sin that the state of Israel does, people say to me, Israel abuses the Palestinians. I say, no, we don't. But we do in one way, which is we embolden and maybe support tacitly the whole mechanism of the Palestinian Authority, which is a oppressive, thuggish regime with all the worst kinds of Stasi type police and repression and certainly no freedom of speech and just daily fear that these people live in. So we allow that to happen right next door. To me, international law is important, but it's subservient to real action on the ground, where we dismantle the Palestinian Authority, hopefully, give a lot of people freedom, give them opportunities in a Jewish state, which they recognize and are non-jihadist within. That's how we give residency to people and who knows what else. But that's a framework to move forward, and not to hold the status quo where we keep on trying to sit at a table and negotiate with these guys. There's nothing to negotiate with an organization that desperately wants to fund terrorists to the tune of $400 million a year. There's nothing to speak to them about. And no amount of international law or getting to negotiations will disabuse me of the notion that these folks are this leadership, like you made a distinction, Michal, between the leadership and the people. This leadership is not legitimate, and it's not the way forward to deal with them. The way forward is for more Israeli sovereignty. A bigger Israel means more rights for more people.
So the only place where I think we made differ, which is fine, is that I don't think we understand what that sovereignty looks like in any part on any side of the green line. I think that we still haven't understood what sovereignty as a state of mind means. And again, as I gave the examples of a shooting on Kvish 6, or the violence within Lod, or the imperative of a country to create transparent, holistic policy and legislation, but also to implement it equally and consistently. That is what I call, good governance, and certainly an attestation to sovereignty. And I don't think that the 72-year-old young and year-old state of Israel has understood what that means and what that looks like, neither on either side of the green line. So I would see this as a symptom, and the very important process that I think we still have. I mean, we're still the founding generation. We're still the founding mothers and fathers. Founding mothers and fathers that laid down the physical infrastructure for this country. Yes, they did. But we have to lay, the second layer of the infrastructure. And this is our turn to discuss these issues, what that sovereignty looks like. And it doesn't matter which mechanisms we use, which mechanisms we use and which tools. And by the way, I can say that with regards to Gaza as well, right? As somebody that has followed and built the golden case and cause, right? So for those that might not be familiar, that are listening to us tonight, Hadar Golden and Doron Shaul, 2 deceased soldiers, alongside 2 Israeli civilians, Avera Mengistu and Hisham Asayed, have been held in violation of international law for 6.5 years. And there too, the understanding of international law, the imperative to speak the language of international law and to say the principles of reciprocity demand not the usual paradigm that we are stuck in, that, the return of 2 deceased soldiers and 2 civilians must mean the release of terrorists. That is not the right paradigm. There is a need for a paradigm shift. Our humanitarian need is the release of 2 deceased soldiers and 2 civilians being held hostage, by the way, by the very same terror organization holding hostage 2 million civilians in Gaza. That is who is holding them hostage, not the state of Israel. But we haven't.
But it seems like international law is not going to bring them back. It seems like only Israeli strength is the thing that can bring them back.
But Yishai, my point. But my point is, we haven't even tried. We don't speak that language. We haven't even tried. So as vaccines go to Gaza, and as suitcases of money goes to Gaza, and as strawberries and crembo go to Gaza, we have never said, okay, humanitarian needs, okay, this is beyond the call of international law, but we have a very high moral standard, except that according to international law principles, i.e. reciprocity, we also have humanitarian needs. Our humanitarian needs are in the form of 2 deceased soldiers and 2 Israeli civilians being held in violation of international law. And you, the international community that is either funding or enabling, have a responsibility to uphold that law. And so really, at the end of the day, I think we're basically saying the same thing and utilizing possibly different tools or different understandings. It's just that, and we talked about the incoming administration, the outgoing administration, and the United States is going to have to decide what role it wants to have, not just in the region, but beyond. And my ability to create this discourse, or, anybody's ability, but to create this discourse with what is very important, obviously to be said, the bipartisan relationship based on shared values with the United States that really transcends time and place and geography and so on, but also demands that the United States look reality in the eye and identify and expose these double standards. And the way to do it is actually to speak to all trustees of international law and human rights, including the United States, and say that as trustees of human rights, and you referred to it a little bit about what we said, that you said about ourselves, but as trustees of international law and human rights, when we don't call out the double standards, essentially we're enabling the culture of impunity, and we become actually complicit in that culture of impunity, the imperative of the culture of impunity towards the terror regime, be they, the Palestinian Authority, be they in Gaza, Hamas, be they in Iran. And so again,
Michal, I just want, when I hear you, I just want to say, like, I hear what you're saying, and these are high-minded. I respect it very much. It's very high-minded. But I sometimes think to myself, like, are you existing in the same plane that the way I perceive international relations towards Israel? I mean, the UN is not like close to hearing our claims of double standards and hypocrisy. It's like a big gang up all day long. I sometimes wonder, I'm like, are we in the right organization? Like, if I was an individual and I was within an organization with 200 other people and they were spitting in my face day in, day out, I would say, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I legitimized their thing by being like, well, if I continue to be here, they kind of, think that they have the right to do this. I sometimes wonder. And so I hear what you're saying about international law, but as a nationalist, meaning to say, as a person who believes in self-determination and in never again-ness, I kind of think to myself, like, didn't we learn that internationalism is not really our salvation? Like
it's not our salvation, right, but we have a role to play. Never again is a prospective statement, founded on our history, but never again requires that we, at the very least, as the canary in the mine shaft, enable our friends and our foes to know that the laws that they've created, that we've all created, right, the international community that is supposed to ensure that never again, as we mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, in order to ensure that, we have to uphold, promote, and protect equally and consistently. And whether everybody plays according to the rules of the game or not, we don't have the privilege to not engage. And I guess that's where we sort of take a different angle of it. And, my friend Hillel Neuer always says, business is booming, with what he does at the UN. So that is the importance of engaging. And, when I think of Tikkun Olam b'Malchut Shaddai, when I think of that responsibility, Tikkun Olam b'Malchut Shaddai for me means not only, are we, yes, as nationalists, yes, our own salvation, yes, the importance of being able to protect ourselves, but we have another role. another historic role to play. And my engagement with international law in this way and its institutions, and the importance and the imperative to expose their double standards or expose hypocrisy or expose ignorance, wherever it comes from, it's part of that commitment, tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, because we can't avoid it all. That's where like the old shmum of Ben Gurion, that understanding of shmum, and of course, he also walked around with a Bible, as we know, and went to Lord Peel with a Bible, and he knew that was our kushan over this land. But the lack or at his time to engage, or the inability to engage at the time, I understand 100%. Dafka as a sovereign country, Dafka having had the 72 years, Dafka knowing that we can protect ourselves, to me holds us into a higher level of having to engage, of at least trying. And neither are we free to desist from it.
I want to make it clear, Michal, that I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think that both approaches are important, and I think that what you're saying is very beautiful. That Israel does have a kind of, I don't know if the word responsibility is right, but a role to play as a light, as a beacon of morality, certainly a beacon of morality in this region. So I agree with you. But as long as that's not the thing that's going to determine the justice. The justice has to be determined not by others giving us or recognizing or fixing things. Like the basis has to be a strong Israel that defends itself. That's what I mean by never againism. Never againism is partially we'll never again rely on others to do it for us. That's part of the never again ethos. But I don't disagree with you, and I respect very much what you're saying, that there is a role to play. Even the Bible has ideas that the kind of international court will sit in Jerusalem. Sometimes I toy with an idea. I'm like, let's just leave the UN and start a new organization. The UN is also not the first organization. It came after the failure of the League of Nations. So sometimes I think to myself, let's create like a League of Justice or something that is, based in Yerushalayim, the city of justice, the city of truth, as it says in Zechariah. And I'm not actually advocating that. I'm just saying, like, there's a part of me that thinks like, gosh, like the UN is a failed model. It's a failed model. It's become actually the home of anti-Semitism. It's like the home of day in and day out lies against us, against our foundation, against our rights, against our history. It literally tries to erase our history and funds UNRWA, which teaches jihadism to young Arab minds. It's like, it's really an organization that we need to at least somewhere in the back of our minds, we have to be like, what the heck? Like, why are we even legitimizing this thing? Now, I'm not calling for us to leave the UN right now, but I am saying that it should be in our heart that there should be some kind of, offense that we take, not just Hillel Neuer's, tweets about how bad the UN is. It's like someplace we got to be like, hey, this is unacceptable. We should really not be slapped around like this. The Abraham Accords is a completely different thing. And I think, again, the Trump administration did an amazing job of lifting up Israel from a client state to an ally, a local regional power in the Middle East. That's where we should be. All the good international law stuff will come on the heels of Israeli strength locally.
First of all, this conversation has been fascinating. There was a reason why I didn't butt in with more questions, because yes, time is running low, so we're not going to be able to get to everything we wanted to talk about. But this discussion between the two of you in terms of sovereignty / international law, international rights, fascinating. I want to highlight 2 points that I don't know if everyone caught on to them, but that should be highlighted from what came out of your conversation. One, the importance of Israel acting as a sovereign, not just in Judea and Samaria, but especially throughout the rest of Israel. I know I was so happy to hear you talk about that, Michal, because this has been something I personally have been talking about for years. How can we expect the Israeli government to implement sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, where in Jaffa and Lod and the Negev and the Galil, we are not implementing sovereignty, and our police and authorities are not enforcing the law equally to all the populations, without getting into the details right now. So very, very happy to hear you talk about it. But the other aspect of sovereignty, which was also came out of your conversation, was the ability for Israel to stand up to the United Nations, to the EU, who are illegally supporting financially and otherwise illegal acts by the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, and yet our Israeli government does not say, hey guys, you're going against your own signature in the Oslo Accords. You don't do that. How are we supposed to trust you?
By the way, the case submitted against the state of Israel at the International Criminal Court violates the Oslo Accords, right? And even that has not been said. So the imperative to say these things, you're right, Avi. It is important that we learn this language and sound it. And I really think that it is important because it sheds back actually on enabling sovereignty internally as well. So it's an awakening to the sovereignty of the state of mind. In Hebrew, it's much better, ribonut todatit, not just geographic sovereignty, but a sovereignty of the consciousness.
Right. And again, it's something I just want
to say to Michal, there is one language that is so important, which is the language of indigeneity. That's an international language. That's certainly
part of international law.
Right. And that's certainly a language that the new administration in the United States will probably be able to kind of connect with more. And we have to make the case that Jews are from Judea. That's just a very simple way to phrase it. Jews are from Judea and Jews have rights in Judea. And that is a language of an indigenous people. We happen to be both the natives and the resettlers, because we're the natives of this land, but we were also kicked out of this land and we're coming back and taking it up. You know, I have a lot of friends who spend time, like my friend Matthew Mauser, who spent time on American Indian reservations, Native American reservations, what in Canada they would call First Nations.
First Peoples,
First Nations. And he told me, Matthew, that when the chief of this tribe that he was hanging out with found out that he was Jewish, he said to him, your peoples have regained your ancestral soil. We have lost our ancestral lands. If we could regain them, we would jump at it. You have the opportunity to go back to your ancestral lands. Go, leave us and go to your ancestral lands. And he did that. And that, to me, that really was a powerful thought of how people understand indigenous rights. And we should definitely be speaking the language of indigenous rights, again, after acting like an indigenous sovereign people as well.
So sometimes, you know, it's hard to tell what comes first. Is it language that reaffirms identity? And, you know, I guess that's the subject of our, you know, discussion anyway tonight. So is it language or law that reaffirms identity, or identity that reaffirms law? And, you know, it probably is cyclical and all of the above, but very interesting that you said about indigeneity. And again, another important concept of international law to affirm, to reaffirm, and to utilize, and to know, to understand that we are an indigenous people that speaks the same language, Hebrew, that reads the same book, the Bible, and that inhabits the same land, Israel, for thousands of years. Now, the ability to say that and the imperative of understanding the need to say that, to me, comes from the place of being able to utilize international law, as I said, to affirm international law and to explain our narrative, our identity, our sovereignty, by utilizing the tools, the resources that the law gives me in order to enable the listener who may not be an indigenous people, who may not, you know, understand what the challenges are of an indigenous people returning to its homeland after thousands of years of exile. But I can make that accessible using the language of the law. So that's a terrific, actually, place to sort of sum up our topic for this evening. And thank you for raising that as well.
I actually wanted to, at the end, I wanted to bring up one small point, which is important for people that most people don't even think about when they think about Judea and Samaria, solutions, the future, Jews and Arabs living together on this land. And both of you touched upon it, because Yishai touched upon it. I'm going to ask you for a short answer. Yishai touched upon it when he highlighted how, unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority really abuse and oppress their own people. They do not have human rights, the Arabs who live under Palestinian Authority control. And you, Michal, also mentioned it with regards to Hamas running Gaza. The Arabs living in Gaza are also oppressed. And unfortunately, the narrative out there, and I know I've had many conversations with especially collegiates who say, well, I don't care if they're being abused. They need self-determination. And I'm posing the question to you like I posed to the collegiates. What is more important? Human rights, the right to live and live freely, which I believe any Arab, Muslim, Christian, Druze are able to have that living under the Jewish state of Israel, whether throughout Israel or even in Judea and Samaria, if that would be the solution, or self-determination under these oppressive rules. What's more important, self-determination or human rights?
I want to say that We have a biblical concept which is called ger toshav, which is a resident alien, or a benefits residency is the nicer version of that today, which means that the Gentiles living in our land need to receive upward mobility, equalities, rights, freedoms, not necessarily the right to control our ethnic national Jewish state, but certainly an opportunity to really succeed here, as long as they're not seditious. In our parlance, it would be non-jihadist, like the Druze. It's a great example. The Druze are an Arab-speaking people, but they have rights and opportunities, and really have succeeded so much, really because they run the consciousness of loyalty and allegiance. Maybe that's a better word, allegiance. As opposed to the software of jihad and dissent against the Jewish state. I want to make this point, Avi. I don't believe that any other peoples have a right to self-determination on our land. To me, anybody who calls for self-determination on our land, that's a seditious theft of our rightful inheritance, our land. I don't think any other tribe, any other peoples have ever had the right to call this place their own. There have been conquerors. They never understood this as their capital. There was never a Palestinian or any other real state that functioned out of here. There were various occupations, but we're back after having waited them out and bested some of them, and so therefore I absolutely and I think it's actually important to be able to verbalize it, like Michal said. Sometimes you kind of have to be a light. You have to say it, and I want to say this clearly and without hurting anybody else's feelings, because I'm actually very pro-Arab. I'll explain in a second, but I'm not pro anybody else's sovereignty on this land. I want to say with clarity, I don't believe that anybody else has a right to self-determination on this land, on the land of Israel. However, a vision for a nationalist like myself is like this: a strong Israel surrounded by strong Arab countries. That's what a nationalist thinks of: a strong national, ethnic national state, Israel, surrounded by strong ethnic national states around us, in cooperation, with success, with trade, with tourism, etc. The Abraham Accords, that's why a person like me is so pushing the Abraham Accords, because I want to show I'm not anti-Arab in any way. I'm pro-Arab. I'm pro this region. I want to think regionally, but I'm pro anybody else I'm against trying to take anybody else taking away this land. That is the opposite of a strong Jewish country. It's a weak Jewish country that's constantly under attack. Its land is taken away, like Gaza, and then rockets are flying at us. We're destabilized through that. Stabilization means a strong Jewish state, strong other Arab countries around us, and then a progress and economic progress and every other kind of progress that comes through cooperation and that kind of let's say Parisian, like Shimon Peres style New Middle East. I believe that that's actually possible. But it actually first comes through the assertion of strength on our land.
Al?
So maybe just a word on that. So, I mean, I guess I'll circle back to the three yeses. I think regardless of any possibility of any understanding of, whatever it is that may be some sort of an understanding of an autonomy plus or a state minus, even if we were to talk about self-determination of in Gaza or wherever else it would be in areas that would be apportioned to the Palestinians. I do believe that the only way forward is the paradigmal shift of recognition first, recognition that enables negotiation that ultimately leads to long-lasting, sustainable peace. Without that, there is nothing to talk about with any other peoples in the region. And as I said, I differentiate leadership from peoples. And I think that the peoples willing and ready, and the countries willing and ready, by the way, we have other countries with whom we already have peace, but it's a cold peace, be it Egypt, be it Jordan. And I think that again, the Abraham Accords and that potential paradigm shift, those three yeses, the imperative to first recognize Israel's right to exist as what it is, Jewish and democratic, founded upon the principles of the Declaration of Independence. Actually, one of the first bills that I submitted in Knesset are actually a reaffirmation of the Declaration of Independence, of the returning indigenous people to our ancestral homeland. And of course, as Yishai said, securing equality to all citizens, all minorities in that Jewish and democratic state. But that is the non-negotiable. That has to be the first order of business. And actually, we didn't talk about it, but the larger plan, the Trump or peace and prosperity plan, whatever it was called at the time, it actually had the same inherent paradigm shift. If anybody looked beyond, then I, don't know the maps and I don't know the details. You could be for, you could be against, but ultimately, that very same paradigm shift was actually harbored or inherently the foundation of that understanding. And if you looked at I think there were 8 terms, right? The end to incitement, the end to pay for slay, the acknowledgement and the recognition of Israel's right to exist as Jewish democratic, and so on and so on. Exactly the same word I would have chosen to say. Recognition is the first and non-negotiable step forward to enable negotiation, ultimately leading to any kind of sustainable, long-lasting peace with whoever it is in the region and beyond.
MK Michal Cotler-Wunch, Yishai Fleischer, international spokesperson for Chevron. Thank you so much for not giving me much work this evening to moderate a wonderful, very enlightening, hopefully for many people, discussion. So thank you so much for everything, both of you.
Thank you, Avi, and nice to see you, Yishai. I look forward to coming to visit.
God bless you, Michal. God bless you, Avi. Keep up the good work, and may your words be fulfilled, that we see Israel as a strong country, which also is the heralder for l'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to fix this world in the image of God. I appreciate those words, and may that prophecy come true in our time.
Amen. And just to end on an inspiring story to sum it all up, because there's so many people out there today, especially Jews, who don't understand that the return of the Jewish people to our ancestral homeland, including Judea and Samaria, is really the most miraculous and inspiring story of humanity in modern history. And just for each and every person, especially the Jews out there, to internalize that and to strengthen their Jewish identity by becoming part of that story and internalizing that. Because really, we're not just a blessing for us being back here, but as you've both mentioned, a blessing for all who live together with us in our society under the Jewish state of Israel. So may we all be blessed, and it should be a healthy year for all of us. Thanks again.
All right, folks, what a great honor and a pleasure it is to broadcast to you wherever you are. Thank you so much for being part of the story. I really want to send you the greatest amount of blessings and love that I could. I know that life is not easy right now. And I just want to say to you, see the little good things and bless God for those things, and see that this time has a blessing for us. And I'm sorry if anybody got sick or anybody got hurt or, God forbid, died. Not a few people, listeners and friends, have lost a loved one in this thing. And so I really just want to send you brachot and also nechama, consolation from Zion. Consolation from Zion. May you be consoled amongst the mourners of Zion, and may you see no more pain. And those of you who haven't had that, may you not have any of that. And may we really see great blessings, as fitting this time of blessings from the land of blessings. So blessings to you, lots of love, and shalom, and Shabbat shalom.
With global instability on the rise, more and more people are turning to God, realizing now they don't exactly know where to look for guidance. The Bible says the guidance will come from the land of Israel. My name is Jeremy Gimpel. A few months ago, we started an online seminar teaching life-changing biblical wisdom revealed from the original Hebrew and straight from the mountains of Judea. What you will discover is that the wisdom transmitted thousands of years ago is speaking directly to us in our time, right now. Join now and get an audio series on the prophecy encoded in the book of Joshua, absolutely for free. Just click on the link below or email fellowship@thelandofisrael.com. I don't know how you found this video or what compelled you to click on that link, but I don't believe in coincidence, and I would encourage you to take the next step on your journey toward the land of Israel. I hope to see you at the Land of Israel Fellowship. Shalom.